Hey folks, Nate Burley, Regional Agronomy Manager for our Western Region here at Beck's Hybrids. With me today, Pat Holloway, agronomist from Southwest Iowa, Craig Shepard, agronomist from Southeast Iowa, and John Caspers, agronomist from Northeast Iowa. And as you can tell, we're just here in our PFR shop at Colfax, Iowa, and we wanted to have a discussion about some of the proactive agronomic strategies that we find to be really beneficial in discussions with growers in the next coming weeks. And really what prompted this were a lot of questions we've been fielding as it pertains to what we left behind last year from derecho. So some of the things like down corn, what kind of fertility management should we be looking into? But these don't just pertain to derecho. We understand every year that we have these issues, these weather concerns that take place in smaller regions. Yes, derecho is on a big scale, right? But we thought we could kind of make it feel smaller by having a discussion from our agronomists across the Iowa marketplace. So let's jump into it. What as it pertains to down corn, what are some of the fertility / tillage residue management strategies that we can do? Pat, why don't you kick us off?
Right, thank you. So definitely the most asked questions, at least in my area, is about fertility and residue. And when we think of in my area, it was a little bit smaller area, but we did have a lot of corn that the guys just worked up or didn't even harvest. And that's obviously where the fertility and the residue management is probably the biggest question. But even in fields where we had, we're able to get some of the combine, but we still have a lot of corn laying down, a lot of ears left in the field, a lot of kernels. What do we do for fertility management moving forward, and then also for the residue management part of it? And from a fertility standpoint, I think really when we think of, if we didn't remove all the corn or any of the corn in some cases, obviously there's a lot of fertility that we would normally be taking out of that field. And so when we think of things like nitrogen and sulfur that are mobile, those we're applying every year anyway, and so we're not going to adjust those much. Now phosphorus and potassium that are immobile and take a while to break down on that residue or those kernels, that will at some point become available, but we're probably not going to see a big portion of that become available for the next growing season. And so my recommendation is that we still fertilize normally, like we harvested a normal crop, because it is going to take a little while for that to become available. But we will pick that up in soil tests in future years. But we're going to see, that fertility we didn't remove eventually become available. And so, and from the residue management part of it, we had a very good fall in the area that I covered, so we got a lot of that residue management done last year, whether it be with a disc chisel or whatever. But I know that John, and talking with you, I know you've had a lot of conversations with growers about different residue management tools and things. So what's kind of your thoughts on that?
So in my area, when I look at residue management, like you said, we had a great year for getting tillage done this year. In some cases, we might have got too much done. And I think that a lot of guys going through this didn't realize how much of a tillage pass that combine actually made going across the field, as far as sizing residue, getting that stuff done right from the get-go at harvest. One of the things that I saw a lot of guys starting to utilize in my area was a crinkle disc. Anywhere in the system, it just seemed that we would get more of a bite or a cut on that stock and cut it clean, get it sized better. Now, like you touched on from fertility, I'm looking at my nitrogen, sulfur, boron. I'm not giving that much credit in my area. P and K, I look at it two different ways. I look at it more from an agronomic standpoint, and this is on a field-by-field level. So I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with my seed advisor, my dealer, and the grower, and really look at those soil tests, look at the samples, and say, where are you at? Where's your overall plan going to be in 5 years? And is this something we can aid to help get you there? And utilizing the increase in markets and stuff to kind of try to either increase ROI on our acre by pulling that P and K out or paying it into the bank. Now, the other thing I look at for nutrients is one of the biggest robbers out there, right? If we get a situation like this, volunteer corn's a big issue. So if I'm having that did I really do a good job on tillage? Did I get things germinated? Did I get it really rolling to where I'm not going to have to fight it much next year, and I can stay in my corn on corn system? I have a lot of livestock guys area that was affected by this, and they really can't afford to rotate to beans. They're feeding a significant amount of their acres. Well, in those situations, we need to look at it as, did we get enough germination out in the field that fall? Or do we need to look at planting a Liberty susceptible hybrid next year, and then the following year cleaning it up with a Liberty application in that corn on corn? Or do we need to rotate it to beans? Now, the other thing that, probably get laughed at a little bit for this, but Hinniker or a row cultivator, we can still get 70% effectiveness out of that by just cleaning up what's in the row. And when you look at that volunteer corn, one volunteer corn plant per square foot can rob significant yield in that acre, sometimes as high as 10 to 12%. So I know, that's my basic recommendations for my area. Greg, I know you guys utilized a lot more cover crops in your area and stuff. How are your recommendations different down in southeast Iowa?
Yeah, with throughout my area, there was a lot of acres impacted by the derecho. And so whether it be tillage or getting even broadcasting cover crop out there, this is really thrown a curveball in our management. And I think the advantage of a cover crop is twofold in this situation. I mean, there's many advantages, but the main two I look at are a cover crop really just boosts biological activity. So that's going to help break down and cycling of nutrients. So for those of you, of course, this is mainly focused in the fall for those of you that were on top of that and able to follow that recommendation. The advantages you're going to have are increased biological activity, both in the fall, but even more so as the soil warms up in the spring, and that biological activity, those soil microbes get to work and get to chugging again. And then the secondary, and I don't want to make a big promise here, a big guarantee, but cover crops, especially say a cereal rye cover crop, does scavenge for nutrients. So those mobile nutrients such as nitrogen, our P and K, it's staying in the system before I move to nitrogen. Yeah, you can either kind of plan on banking that phosphorus and potassium, whereas the nitrogen, it's mobile, it's volatile. And yet if you had a cover crop out there, and this is the number one thing I got questions on. What about my nitrogen? I had a chunk of money invested in that nitrogen, and some of it is still there in that residue. There's some truth to that. I'm with Pat on this though too, where I wouldn't really bank on or plan for more than 20 to maybe 40 units of nitrogen. And that's even with a cover crop, might be on the high side of that to the 40 units. But I think in terms of nitrogen fertility, you don't want to short the crop this year because you've got potential for some really good yields, especially if you've already got the tillage done in the fall. And fertilizing that corn with nitrogen is going to be important.
Yeah, and I think a few questions we've gotten too. We're doing PFR studies with some of the microbial nitrogen products, and fielded a few questions of, hey, is this the year to apply one of those products to try and capture some of that nitrogen from last year? And we don't have a lot of data that shows anything along that line, but when you start thinking about the system, you talked about the soil temperature, the microbial activity, anything we can do to enhance that is going to give us a benefit in the long run.
Well,
right?
And to that point, we have PFR proven products like Res Plus that were being utilized and showing returns well before we were dealing with downed corn. So now introduce those to a downed corn situation. If some guys were able to utilize that in their fall practices and capture even that much more when we talk microbials, because in Iowa, the biggest kicker that we have is we have a huge opportunity at mineralization here to really supplement some nitrogen. And, I 100% agree. The farming below the ground is going to be the future of this. And if we can learn how to manage it, even on a minuscule scale, we're playing with a lot of pounds of nutrients there.
So we talked a lot about the volunteer corn, and I think we talked more along the lines of maybe what we didn't get picked up with the combine. What about those farms that they got just under, right? The farms that there was no attempt at that harvest. Would we change anything on a management recommendation? Anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, so I can field this one, guys. So in those situations, I'm going to really recommend a guy goes to beans. You know, if we're going to have a significant amount of volunteer corn, I want to go to beans and look at a dim or a FOP application, something to make sure I can get that cleaned up a lot better for guys. And I know with Greg and Pat, you guys have some differing opinions on what to do when we go to soybeans. You know, Greg, you're big into inoculants and farming below ground. What are your recommendations for inoculants when we're going into that soybean system that we're not necessarily used to in our areas?
Yeah, I tell you, this part of the conversation, as you can imagine, was somewhat unpopular in the fall, and we've had a gift in a much better soybean price, much more attractive economics to plant soybeans here coming spring of 2021 here. But I just was getting hammered and really pushed. I need to grow corn. I need to grow corn on corn, even in this down corn derecho affected situation. And I'm with you. I'm uncomfortable with that. Yeah, I mean, you can talk row cultivation. If perhaps in 2020 you planted a double pro, that is a Liberty susceptible trait. And if that was your whole field, you can go in there, plant a Liberty tolerant hybrid. And of course, just so we're covering all our bases here, plant a Liberty tolerant hybrid and apply Liberty to it and get rid of all the volunteer corn. But I just think I kind of get knots in my stomach thinking about the quantity. I mean, we're talking 100, 150, 180, 200 bushel or more of corn that is still in those top couple inches, even with tillage. I mean, if you worked it in, yeah, and actually the biggest problem to me here is that the majority of that corn's still on the ear.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
even I saw some 2 and 3 pass tillage done in the fall, but a lot, and you're breaking that ear and you're getting it scattered some, but there's still a lot of the corn still on that ear that will wind up being a bouquet of volunteer corn and just really raw yield, like you touched on, John. And so, yeah, I agree. My recommendation has been to rotate to soybean. I think, I mean, there's a couple of different reasons. The first one, real quick, off the top of my head, is, it helps manage corn root. Yeah. Actually, for those of you that are long-time corn on corn, you got good economics on soybean this year. You got some challenges you're facing with the possibility of trying to control a large, 10x the number of volunteer corn that you've probably ever controlled on a large scale before. And so why not just use this as your year to manage that rootworm trait, manage the potential resistance for corn rootworm against our rootworm traits. And then, yeah, I'm talking to customers and dealers are having conversations with customers, this is something that's a little bit unique to them because maybe some of these farmers may not even own a soybean head for their combine and haven't grown soybeans in 5, 7, 10, 12 years. And so I can assure you that it is very important to inoculate those soybeans. If there's one key take home that I would say, don't just overlook that, because what happens is that the bacteria that colonizes the soybean root, the rhizobia bacteria, and allows the soybean to nodulate and produce its own nitrogen. Soybeans actually use more nitrogen than corn, as a matter of fact, but they produce their own through nodulation. And that bacteria isn't native to the soil, isn't native to Iowa soil. So that's what this inoculant does. It actually seeds the outside of that seed, and we're able to get the bacteria, the rhizobia bacteria, into the soil to promote fixation, nitrogen production, and the key for you taking this home as a farmer is maximize yield. I'd be interested to see what you guys think on this. I've been talking, even if you're maybe 4 years without soybeans, you've got a farm that hasn't seen soybeans in 4 years. I have done a little reading and done some looking into the research, and I'm seeing even 4 to 5 bushel in as little as 4 years of non-soybean, a field without soybean for 4 years. Whereas, we know we're looking at 10, 12 years of corn on corn in some of these geographies. But what's your estimate on that, guys?
Well, I don't necessarily have an estimate on yield, but my standard recommendation, if we've been corn on corn period, I recommend inoculant. It's not expensive to put on. if we're talking small amounts, it's relatively easy regardless of the equipment.
Well,
to
an
still
application's easy to get it on. No, I agree with you.
So my standard recommendation is, hey, we're not spending much. I think there's a little bit of yield benefit even after 2 years out of beans, and more as the longer we're out of that rotation. So I just like to do it as a standard practice when there's been corn on corn.
So Pat, your big thing is pathology, especially in soybeans. You're the seed treatment guru for us, for our group at least. You're the guy we always lean on. And a guy that's going into that soybean situation, does he need to worry about any diseases or any issues, and what's he need to be looking for?
Maybe a guy that hasn't grown soybeans in 10 years.
Exactly.
Well, just got to brush up on this.
Yeah, for sure. And that sometimes these acres have been out of soybeans for a while for a reason, because we had issues with sudden death, or maybe our cyst nematode was impacting our yields. And so some of those problems probably didn't go away as we were out of corn for a while. And for instance, sudden death syndrome, it's been documented that it does really well, especially when we got corn seed there. It grows really well in the soil when there is corn seed. It does less well when it's just residue. But in these type of situations where we've had plenty of kernels there for that disease to develop and continue to develop this spring, I think if that was a problem, if that field was a problem for sudden death in the past, I would treat it as it could definitely be a problem again, even if it's been out of corn for several years, or out of beans for several years. And the same with cyst nematode. I mean, it's a long process. You're never going to get rid of it totally, so they're still there, at least to some extent. So I think as we look at planting beans for the first time in a while, I would still, and maybe since the last time you planted beans, there's some new technology we can use. There's nematicides that are biological nematicides that can be applied. Olivo is obviously a big product when we talk about sudden death and soybean cyst nematode. And then of course the key thing is planting a variety that has a genetic resistance for cyst, whether it be the PI 88788 or Peking. Both can work very well, and so in these fields that are soybeans, think back to when they were beans last, and treat them as such.
Might have to ask your grandpa about them in some of these fields.
That's right.
Well, that's just it. If we're not familiar with growing beans, we have a lot of great resources with our practical farm research studies when it comes to planting date, populations, any of your management strategies. We've got those 5 success strategies to grow soybeans, which apply whether you're corn on soybean rotation, or they're a good refresher for some guys that aren't familiar with them for the last
absolutely.
10, 15 plus years.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really one thing that I've talked about with those management strategies is really trying to get a guy's head wrapped around nodes per acre instead of plants per acre. And it's tough for a lot of them to understand, especially coming out of the corn world. So planting early, increasing our nodes per acre, utilizing that, photosensitivity, and increasing our growth after we switch to reproductive growth. We're still going to continue to grow as an indeterminate plant. And, it's kind of tough for some of those guys to wrap their heads around. We're used to corn where everything's fixed, structured, and we can, and we know when and how to manipulate it. So, you've been working with PFR even before you started as a regional role. What have you seen out of those 5 management practices? What can we expect out of those?
I think the number one go-to is populations. One of my aha moments was we're pushing populations too high, and we may fall into a tendency this year.
Wait, we're seed company. We're telling you to drop your populations?
It's all about ROI, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you look at going into these, I think some growers, and I would have the tendency to say, man, I got a lot of residue out there. I better make sure I'm up in my population to get those plants per acre. But it goes back to what you said, getting the nodes per acre. We got to trust the genetics that we have today, the seed treatment packages that we have. To me, it sounds like what you guys had said all combines into making sure we have that right product, which we have the choices this year, right? Whether you want to go on the enlist side of it or you want to stick with Extend Flex, but selecting the right product, making sure we're putting the full treatment package on it, increasing our odds of getting that microbial activity going by inoculating, and then just watching the populations, keeping them under that manageable population rate. So population's a big one that stands out to me. You can see the planter in the background. We're preparing with row cleaners. We're preparing with closing wheels. So there's just so much information through practical farm research that really can be a resource to help you really be successful.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Anything else we're missing? I mean, I think that covers a lot of the base main questions we're getting. I know there have got to be others, right? And we could probably go for another 20 minutes talking about this, but I appreciate you guys taking the time here, because I think the goal again is just to provide you with some nuggets, provide you with some information to help you get the discussion going, to be proactive, right? And that's our goal for this year as an agronomy team, is just being proactive. And so that's a success strategy to take home. Be proactive going into the 2021 growing season. If you have specific questions and you'd like to have a conversation or ask for some specific recommendations, please do reach out to your local Beck's representative or contact one of us for more information. With that, John, Greg, Pat, thank you guys. Thank you. Have a great day.